Once again, welcome class 9 to BSc with Chemistry lesson 1. That is the nature of metal. Now one thing must remember, I am going to concentrate according to the new syllabus issued by NCERT. It means 30% bit of syllabus from the previous year. Things to remember. Write it down. The things to remember. Whatever things you have to remember about the element. Things to remember. Definitely, this is important for 1 mark questions also. Whatever the things you have to remember, you must write in your copy that nitrogen is the most abundant element in Earth. Okay, in Earth, in atmosphere, it is present in the atmosphere. So nitrogen is most abundant means more, zyada, most abundant element on atmosphere. Okay, element in atmosphere, on Earth and in atmosphere. Now, what is the amount of nitrogen in the atmosphere? It is nearly 78%. Out of 100% composition of air, the 78% the part is the nitrogen only. So it is the most abundant element present in the atmosphere. And what about the Earth's crust? The oxygen is the most abundant element on Earth's crust. Oxygen is most abundant element on Earth's crust. Crust is the first layer of Earth. The first layer of the Earth is called the Earth's crust. Oxygen is the most abundant element which is present on the Earth. Oxygen and silicon. It is very much important because they make how the oxygen is the most abundant substance of the Earth's crust. Earth's crust, only soil, rocks, sand, etc. is present. How the Earth's crust is formed? It is formed with the help of the soil, with the help of the sand, with the help of the rock, and soil, rock, and sand. Actually, they constitute of only 2 elements. One is the oxygen, and second is the silicon. Okay, so oxygen and silicon is constituent okay, are constituent of sand, soil, and rock. And what is the sand, soil, and rock? Actually, sand, soil, and rock make the Earth's crust. Okay, oxygen is most abundant element present in the Earth's crust. Okay, now what about our body? Our body is composed of various types of the elements. Lots of elements present in our body. Basically, our body is composed of oxygen, carbon, then hydrogen, then nitrogen, okay, then phosphorus, calcium, etc. It means Our body, we are also matter. We have some mass. There are some mass weight is there, and we also occupy some space. We are also the part of the universe, and we are the matter. And our body is composed of different type of the matter, like this. That's the carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, and all. Okay. The elements occur in three states. Three physical states are there. Elements occur in three physical states. Okay. Out of 118 elements, we are able to classify these elements in three physical states. What are the three physical states? We know very well. They are called solid, liquid, and gas. Or solid, liquid, and gas. So there are three physical states are there. That is solid, liquid, and gases. And the element exists in all these three states of matter. Some solid elements are there, like carbon. Carbon is a solid element. You know very well where the carbon is present. Lot of places are there. When you break down the cell, any cell, you get one black color substance present in between. That is called the graphite rod. In your pencil lead also, the graphite is present. That is the solid. Then you know very well the jewelry is made by the silver, or it is made by the gold or platinum, etc. etc. So there are lots of solid elements are there. Liquid elements, we have only two liquid elements. Okay. First, it is a metal. A liquid metal. Write it like that. First, the two is only there. First is the liquid metal. Liquid metal. And what is the name of the liquid metal? It's mercury. You have very much seen it in the doctor's thermometer. In thermometer, something raised up height. That is called the mercury. And mercury is the liquid metal. And second is the liquid non-metal. Liquid non-metal. And what is liquid non-metal? It is called the bromine or bromine. Okay. The third is the gases. The third physical state of matter is the gases. And only 11 elements are there, which are called the gases. Okay? Only 11 elements. Out of 180, only 11 elements are there, which are called gases. And what are these elements actually are? For example, oxygen, hydrogen, nitrogen. Okay. Something is filled in the bulb. Normal bulb, it contains some gases are there. Some gases are there. These gases are called noble gases. Why these are called noble gases? Because they are inactive, non-reactive. So they are called the noble gases. Okay, what are the noble gases? They are called helium, they are called neon, they are called argon, etc. etc. So what is the thing to remember about the elements? First, elements. Total 118 elements are there, out of which 92 are the naturally occurring elements, and rest of all the man-made or the laboratory prepared elements. Next, nitrogen is the most abundant element present in the atmosphere, and oxygen is the most abundant element present in the earth's crust, because earth's crust is made up of the sand, soil, and rocks only, and the oxygen and silicon is present in the sand, soil, and the rock. Our body is also composed of elements such as carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, etc. etc. Physically, they are classified elements into three types. One is the solid, one is the liquid, and one is the gases. So only 11 elements are the gaseous elements, out of which Some are the noble gases. Noble gases are the gases which are inactive or inreactive. Rest of the gases are reactive. Liquid, on two liquid elements we know about it. One is the metal and one is the non-metal. The liquid metal is the mercury and liquid non-metal is the bromine. And rest of the this element is the solid one. So this is the thing that you have to remember about the element. Now move towards the classification of elements. In the starting of the lesson or starting of the class, I must told you about the classification of the elements. Elements are classified into three broad classifications. One is called the metal, one is called the non-metal, and one is called the metalloid. I think this is not a new topic for you because in 8th class you already studied about the metal, non-metal, and the metalloid. Okay, actually we are going to discuss whatever the further we have studied in previous class, and we have to include something new in that. So what is this topic? It's the classification of elements. Classification of elements. Okay. The elements are classified into three types. Elements are classified into three types. One is called metal, other is called non-metal. One is the metal, another is the non-metal. And what is third is called the metalloid. Okay, element is classified into three types, that is called the metal, non-metal, and metalloid. I am going to write all the characters of the metal. You have to compare it with the characters of the non-metal. You are already studied in the 8th class. Okay, I am simply write the term and give the definition, but you have to write the definition in your copy also. Metals are malleable. Okay, metals are malleable. What is the meaning of the term malleable? If we hammer the metal, it can be bitten into thin sheet. If we are able to convert it into thin sheet. In your home, you must see the aluminium foil, or on the street, the shopkeeper put the silver foil. The foil is the thinnest part of the metal. So all the metals have malleability. And what is the meaning of malleability? They can be bitten into thin sheets. Okay, what is the meaning of malleable? Can be bitten into thin sheet. Thin sheet. Or sheet. For example, aluminium foil is here. What about the non-metals? Non-metals are brittle. Brittle. In the opposite of malleable, the word non-malleable is not correct. No, it's not correct. For malleable, the opposite word used is the brittle. What is the meaning of the? It cannot be beaten into thin sheet. You take off the pencil lid, okay, and beat it with the help of the hammer. What you get? All the pencil lid gets powdered. So we are unable to beat the non-metal into thin sheet. So what is malleable? It can be beaten into thin sheet. What is brittle? It cannot be beaten into thin sheet. Bitten into thin sheet. Okay. Now let's move towards the second property, that is called the ductile. Metals are ductile. Ductile means they can be drawn into thin wire. If you want to stretch it tightly, it must convert it into thin wire. All the electrical wire is made of the metal only. Okay, aluminium wire, zinc wire, copper wire. Or for ornaments, we use the gold wire, the silver wire. All the metals have the ability or ductility is present. It means it can be drawn into thin wire. Thin wire. What about the non-metals? Non-metals are non-ductile nature. Non ductile in nature. We are unable to draw the non-metal into thin wire. The third, metals are lustrous or shiny. Shiny. You know about the aluminium. It is shiny metal. Gold, silver, all are the shiny metals. But what about the non-metal? They are non-lustrous and cannot be polished. Cannot be polished. It is non-lustrous and we are unable to polish it. Next, about the metals. Metals are good conductor of. Metals are good conductor of heat and electricity. Heat and electricity. This is a general property. All the properties is not going hard and fast for every metal. Some exception is there, but metals are generally good conductor of heat and electricity. What about the non-metals? Non-metals are generally poor conductor of heat and electricity. Poor conductor of heat and electricity. I already told some exceptions are there. Some exceptions like the graphite. Graphite is the allotrope of the carbon and graphite is the good conductor of electricity. Okay, some exceptions are there. Some non-metals are there which are the good conductor of electricity. So for example, except the graphite. Graphite is good conductor of electricity. Okay, and next move towards the next property. Next property in the metals. Metals are sonorous. Sonorous, it means they are able to produce the sound. They produce a sound. Okay, what is sonorous? Produce sound. Just remember, you are going back from your home and you saw a home making with the tin sheet. What work you have to do? You pick out the one stone from the roadside and put that stone on the roof of that home. Why? Because it produces a sound. Or any iron pillar are there, electrical pillar is there. When we move towards that, we start playing a game. ये पत्थर इसको कौन मार सकता है? Why you throw the stone? Because it produces a sound. So all metals are sonorous in nature. And what about the non-metals? Non-metals are non-sonorous. They cannot produce the sound. Metals are generally high melting and boiling point. High melting and boiling point. Melting and boiling point. What is the melting and boiling point? It means they need more temperature to melt. What is the meaning of the boiling point? They need more temperature. What is the meaning of the melting point? They need very less temperature, very maximum temperature to the melt and to the boil. And what about the non-metals? Non-metals are low melting and boiling point. Melting point and boiling point. We write it MB and BP. What about the nature of this? It is hard in nature. It is hard. So some are soft like the sodium and the potassium, but maximum metals are hard in nature. You must remember the iron. You are able to cut the iron by your hand? No, it is not possible. It is hard in nature. And what about the non-metal? It is soft in nature. Soft. You take out the pencil lid and break it down. You are able to break it down because it is soft in nature. So, out of all the elements we know, 80% elements are metals. 80% elements are metals and only 20% are considered as non-metals. Okay, if I ask now, what is the definition of metal and non-metal? Okay, how are we able to define it? Metals are the elements which are in the label, ductile and generally good conductor of electricity or any other property are able to take. What is the non-metals? Non-metals are the elements which are brittle, non-ductile and generally poor conductor of electricity. We are able to define both the terms. If I ask what is the difference between metal and non-metal, what you have to do? You have to move this column and you have to write the differences between these two. But best way to write the difference, I must make it here. Okay, for this difference, you have to make 3 columns like this. The first column is for the properties, second column is for the metal, and third is for the non-metal. Property. Okay. Properties, whatever the properties, you put here the 1 number, or you have to put the serial number also here. Serial number. Okay. You just write here 1. And what is the property? It is the property. It is malleability. Malleability. Here write malleable. Here write brittle. Second, ductility. Ductility. Right here, ductile, non-ductile. Third, conductivity. Conductivity. Right here, good conductor, poor conductor. Then, sonorous, sonorosity. Sonorous, non-sonorous. We are able to differentiate metal and non-metal. So this is the best way. Anyhow, you are make 2 columns only and write 1 column for the metal and 1 for the non-metal. And you are able to write difference like that also. So this is about the metal and non-metal. But we have one more classification here that we call the metalloid. Okay, move towards the metalloid. I must rub a little bit from here. I need some space. That's why I rub it from here. Now what is the metalloid? We know that all the elements are with the metal and non-metal. But when we make it the sequence, there is an intermediate part also there. Intermediate part, it means some elements are placed in between these two. Some elements are placed between the metal and the non-metal. The elements which are placed in between the non-metal and the metal, they collect some properties from here and some properties from here. It means they have not defined property of the metal and defined property of the non-metal. There are some mixing properties of the metal and non-metal. These elements are called the intermediate elements. So some elements have intermediate properties of metal and non-metal. Why they have the intermediate properties? Because they are present in between the metal and non-metal. So what are the metalloids? Metalloids are elements or some elements, metalloids are elements or some elements have intermediate, some elements having intermediate properties of metals and non-metals. Metals and non-metals. It means they have not a defined property of metal or defined property of non-metal. Some mixing of the properties are there. Some elements having intermediate properties of metal and non-metal. Why this intermediate properties of metal and non-metal? Because these elements are present or intermediate in between metal and non-metal. Okay, they are placed between the metal and non-metal. So they have the properties, intermediate properties of metal and non-metal. Some elements having intermediate properties of metal and non-metal are called metalloids. Lots of metalloids. Too much metalloids are not present. Very limited number of metalloids are there. In that, some are boron, for example, silicon, germanium, gallium, etc. Okay, so these are the example of some. The antimony, the bismuth, some example are there of the metalloids. So what are the conclusion of today's topic? we are studied about the matter. What are matter? Anything which occupies space is called the matter. Matter, the smallest unit, is the element, and element is composed of three substances. It is classified into metal, non-metal, and the all for today. Bye bye. Okay. If I ask now, what is the definition of metal and non-metal? Okay. How are we able to define it? Metals are the elements which are malleable, ductile, and generally good conductor of electricity, or any other property are able to take. What is the non-metals? Non-metals are the elements which are brittle, non-ductile, and generally poor conductor of electricity. We are able to define both the terms. If I ask what is the difference between metal and non-metal, what you have to do? You have to leave this column and you have to write the differences between these two. But best way to write the difference, I must make it here. Okay, for this difference, you have to make three columns. Like this. The first column is for the properties, second column is for the metals, and third is for the non-metal. Property. Okay. Properties, whatever the properties, you put here the one number, or you have to put the serial number also here. Serial number. Okay. You just write here 1. And what is the property? It is the property. It is malleability. Malleability. Here write malleable. Here write brittle. Second, ductility. Ductility. Right here, ductile, non-ductile. Third, conductivity. Conductivity. Right here, good conductor, poor conductor. Then sonorous, sonorosity, sonorous, non-sonorous. We are able to differentiate metal and non-metal. So this is the best way. Anyhow, you are make two column only and write one column for the metal and one for the non-metal. And you are able to write difference like that also. So this is about the metal and non-metal. But we have one more classification here that we call the metalloid. Okay, move towards the metalloid. I must rub a little bit from here. I need some space. Let's fire a bit from here. Now, what is the metalloid? We know that all the elements are with their metal and non-metal. But when we make it the sequence, there is an intermediate part also there. Intermediate part, it means some elements are placed in between these two. Some elements are placed between the metal and the non-metal. The elements which are placed in between the non-metal and the metal, they collect some properties from here and some properties from here. It means they have not defined property of the metal and defined property of the non-metal. There are some mixing properties of the metal and non-metal. These elements are called the intermediate elements. So some elements have intermediate properties of metal and non-metal. Why they have the intermediate properties? Because they are present in between the metal and non-metal. So what are the metalloids? Metalloids are elements or some elements, metalloids are elements or some elements have intermediate, some elements having intermediate properties of metals and non-metals. Metals and non-metals. It means they have not a defined property of metal or defined property of non-metal. Some mixing of the properties are there. Some elements having intermediate properties of metal and non-metal. Why this intermediate properties of metal and non-metal? Because these elements are present or intermediate in between metals and non-metals. Okay, they are placed between the metal and non-metal. So they have the properties, intermediate properties of metal and non-metal. So some elements having intermediate properties of metal and non-metals are called metalloids. metalloids are called metalloids. Not just metalloids. Too much metalloids are not present. Very limited number of metalloids are there. In that, some are boron, for example, boron, okay, silicon, germanium, gallium, etc., etc. Okay, so these are the example of some, the antimony, the bismuth. Some example are there of the metalloids. So, what are the conclusion of today's topic? We have studied about the matter. What are matter? Anything which occupies space is called the matter. Matter, the smallest unit, is the element, and element is composed of three substances. It is classified into metal, non-metal, and the all for today. Bye bye.